that transformed Christian metaphysics. It provided the spiritual roots for Western Europeans for 1,500 years. So it went this way, sneakily, pseudo. If we turn around and decide to look at it and see what we can master with it, then that will give us, you know what that'll give us? That'll give us in a encapsulated, brief, very brief, compact view of this entire development right here. The entire philosophical development. Compact, neat, just a short number of pages. If we do that, then we can use that as the mean to get into this, to see whether it's worth our while to go deeper. If it transformed Christian thought into a metaphysical system of remarkable strength, we don't have to dump it because Pseudo-Dionysius and people like him were included in it. No need to. We can then go the other way and say, all right, what are the writings? If they're brief and simple, what do they show? Well, I thought I'd bring up a couple of ideas to show you what he shows. Matter of fact, there are only a couple, but I thought they're pretty central, so I'll introduce them. First thing he did was this. He saw the idea of law was central to the Hebraic Jewish Judaism. Fine. He saw that if you're going to try to introduce this Hellenic spirit, you're going to have to do something about the idea of law. He said, oh, well, law, that's nomos. Right? It's the visible realm, how to order the visible realm, the political realm. Moses laid down the laws, the basic laws for men in the visible world to get along together. That's what he did, lay down God's laws. Now, the basic idea of the whole Hellenic tradition is based on three ideas. What's called the good, sometimes it's called the one, right? Mind, sometimes called intelligence, and soul. Now, any two things at all, if they have any connection, have something they share to bind them together. Anything at all. Two bricks. If you want to get them to fit, you need some mortar to bring them together. You need a third thing that can tie these two things together. Once they're together, then it's a unity. Well, these things stand to one another just like this. A, B, C. That's a mean analogy, you see. A and B, right? A, B. There's some third thing that ties them together. The mortar is to, oh, we'll call it M, as mortar is to B. Let's change the letters and even make it simpler, shall we? Let's call this C, and let's call this E, and call that middle thing, what's needed, B. Then these two things, A, B, C. Then A is to B as B is to C. That's a mean analogy. A is to B as B is to C. You can express it 2 is to 4 as 4 is to 8. That's a mean analogy. What's significant then about this, you see, is that this is the highest realm of intelligence. This is soul. Therefore, there is a part of man's soul there's a part of intelligence which is mean analogies. Now, what that means that the whole metaphysical world is made up of the highest vision of God, called the good, the mind of God, intelligence, and man, soul. This is a basic mean analogy. It runs through everything. Anytime you have two significant things that are joined in some way, you're playing with a mean analogy. Now, I have a very interesting quote I wanted to read you about the goal of this curious thing. And I put a marker here so I could make it for you. This unity runs through all reality. Now let me give you the quote. It is the basis of the transmission of the good from the higher to lower levels. It is a universal cosmic order. It's the idea of kingdom. The kingdom of God becomes a totally ordered cosmos. Well, we need a new name for that. Thesmos. Thesmos is the law not of visible things, but of spiritual things, of the nature of reality. Therefore, there are two laws. One, Judaic, Moses, the visible world, the visible laws for social things. Another kind of law for ultimate reality and the way in which our universe is structured. And this same thing can be said about man. In man there is a soul, and there are three parts of his soul. The three parts of his soul are going to be linked in the same way we said a moment ago. And therefore we're living in a universe in which this threesome is part of the man's being, his soul. It deals with the highest realities. Same rules apply to it. Therefore, each one of these, you see, has to be defined, described, and then their interrelationships and what's significant about them you can describe. You can then describe what it's like to experience each one of these, not to be told about it. And that's the realm of the spirit, or mysticism, or philosophy. This new word, Dionysius brought in, thesmos. And he said thesmos must exist before Moses. See how clever he was? He said this order is part of the very nature and heart of reality. Now, each one of these things, if it has a separate definition, has there's something about each that can be so well defined that it means that each one has its own logos, principle. Each one has their own principle, logos. Each one has their own logos or principle. Hey, three parts of man's soul. Each one has a principle. The mind, right, the spirited part, the appetitive, or the desires. Each one has its own functioning. Each one has its own rules. Each one has its interaction. Right? Well, if each one then is perfectly intelligible, and the way in which they interact is intelligible, the whole thing has a unity. The whole thing can be embraced, grasped, understood, can be talked about, shared. You can then talk about what are the different kinds of descriptions that the soul may have as it proceeds up through these.